Warning, this podcast contains discussions of sensitive topics that some listeners may find triggering. Listener discretion is advised.
Jazzcast Pros.
After struggling with weight fluctuations for over 20 years and feeling that this was keeping her from having successful romantic relationships, after connecting with an eating disorder therapist, our special guest learned that her eating disorder was a result of something much deeper, sexual abuse. She went on a journey of self-discovery through the use of EMDR therapy. Tune in to listen to our special guest's journey. Welcome to Fearless Fridays with Maryann, the podcast to help you get unstuck, heal your inner child, and reshape your future. I am your host, Maryann Rivera-Dannert, and with over 10 years of experience as a coach, author, speaker, and owner of MRD Empowerment Solutions, I use my personal life experience with trauma, healing, and rediscovery as a catalyst for personal growth. My mission is to empower you to discover and unlock your full potential, paving the way to a life marked by freedom and balance. Together, we'll tackle the tough stuff and find the strength within to rise above. And today we have an incredible guest who has overcome tremendous challenges. Let's bring her on and get started.
Hi, Maryann. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Patty Cabot, and I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Take us back to the beginning of your 20-year struggle with weight fluctuations and share what led to you believing that it was preventing you from romantic relationships.
Okay, sure. Happy to. So starting in my late teens, I started gaining and losing massive amounts of weight every 2 years. So 50 to 75 pounds every 2 years. And again, started in my late teens. It went on for 20 years. And how you look and how you weigh and all of those things have nothing to do with finding love. But to me, I found myself unacceptable when I was heavy. So, I just assumed my weight was always getting in my way of meeting someone and having a meaningful relationship. And I have to say, I am a fantastic dieter. So I could always lose the weight, but I couldn't maintain it. And it's not like it's rocket science, but it just eluded me. I could not crack the code. And so when I was in my late 30s, I found a therapist who dealt with eating disorders. And we kind of went through my story and, what was going on with my weight. And to me, it was very much my weight, my weight, my weight. And she had said to me, it's not your weight. Your weight is a symptom of something much bigger. And I was sexually abused as a child. And that was really what it came down to. And while I was always aware of what had happened to me when I was growing up, it was just something I pushed away, never thought about. It just wasn't something that I thought about. And in my late 30s, when I started working with her, it just so happened her specialty was trauma. And she did a kind of therapy called EMDR, which is really about trauma. And once we started focusing on my childhood sexual abuse, it was one, a very long process, but two, my weight actually became the easiest part of it.
Wow. So over the course of your, therapy, and what was it, EMDR?
So EMDR is a kind of therapy, and it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a mouthful. So basically what happens is whatever kind of trauma, and, everybody experiences trauma in their life, right? It could be any number of things. So pick your trauma. Right. When you have trauma, it's as if your thoughts and feelings are running along on a train track. And once you have a trauma, it blows up the train track. So whatever was on the train track is suddenly just thrown up into space and it's jumbled. And so the whole point of EMDR is to get everything back on the track so you can process it. And so that's why a lot of times people are triggered by things that have nothing to do with really anything, but it's a sight, a smell, a sound, something that brings them back to a traumatic experience. And it's because it's unresolved. And so EMDR is trying to help you resolve the conflict.
So how did this realization impact your struggles and made you connect, the two issues? And how has that healing process been?
So honestly, I could have had till the end of time and I never would have put the two together. I wouldn't have. And I actually think that I am not at all unique in that all I could see what was right in front of me, which was my body. And I found issues with my body. So I was like, well, if I just lose the weight, it's going to be perfect, right? Everything is going to magically fall into place. And we all kind of have these fantasies about if I look this way or if this happened, everything else is suddenly the stars will align and it's going to be perfect. And obviously that's not the reality of it. And as I said, my weight kind of in a way became the easiest thing to manage. And over the first 3 years that I worked with her, I lost 100 pounds. And what was interesting about it is it's the first time I ever maintained it. And I had been roughly the same weight for more than 15 years. So, I mean, that part was great, which is not to say that I have a history of binging, which is very common for childhood sexual abuse victims. That tends to be kind of the eating disorder of choice. And binging is complicated. It's not all pleasure. It's not all pain. It's, it fulfills a lot of needs. And, it's still, I don't want to say that I struggle with it in the way that I used to, but I still, I could still look at myself and be like, I could be thinner. I could be this. I could be that. Like, it's not like I'm like, wow, I look fantastic. It's amazing. I think those body issues are kind of bred into you. And I think one of the ways that I kind of learned to think about it was my body was the scene of the crime. So I always find fault with my body, right? Like it didn't protect me. It didn't keep me safe, whatever. And being attractive or being wanted by people can be a frightening experience, right? Because it makes you vulnerable to what other people want. And I think the biggest issue is setting boundaries that make you feel safe. And I think people, not just sexual abuse, but I think any kind of physical abuse, like you don't feel entitled to set boundaries because you couldn't set them when you were young. So you grow up not knowing how to set boundaries.
Yeah. And then sometimes too, in line with what you said, sometimes you may have had those boundaries, but the assault still happened.
Exactly.
The violation still occurred. So sometimes you may think like, what's the point? Because this already happened.
And I think for me, I actually wrote a book about kind of my foray into therapy. So I started with my therapist in EMDR, and it ended up being a 12-year journey. I worked with her the whole time, but I kept getting stuck at different places. So I lost all this weight. I was making all of this progress, but I still couldn't meet anybody. And we were like, oh my God, how do we crack the code on this? So I started doing all these other therapies, including chiropractic care. I went to a sex therapist. I did group therapy for sexual abuse. I mean, honestly, like fairly terrifying things to to lay yourself bare and expose yourself to. But I was desperate. I wanted to figure out what my issue was. So I ended up writing a book about these experiences, and you can download it for free at my website. My website is pattycabot.com, and my book is called Not That Girl Anymore. And I really talk about kind of the correlation between the eating disorder and, my weight is always the thing that I would come back to.
Yeah.
No matter what I looked like, it was always the thing. My body was always the thing that I came back to.
So can you talk a little bit as to, you mentioned the EMDR therapist, sex therapist. How has this, different type of therapies in the journey, how has that been? And how did they each play a role into your healing process?
So some of them played a much bigger role than others. So EMDR was, again, I worked with her the entire 12 years I was in therapy. And I love my shrink. And I just want to say real quickly too, I interviewed multiple therapists before I found the one I liked, and fit matters. It matters a ton. You have to feel safe with the person. You have to like the person. You have to respect the person. So if somebody is like, I'm not really making progress, I'm not really connecting, you need a new therapist, and don't feel bad about that. You just need to make sure that it's the right person for you. So after she and I had made all this progress, and, I was just stuck, and she had kind of explored other things that I could try. And one of them I was really intrigued by. It was called chiropractic care. And basically it's an offshoot of like kind of regular chiropractic, but it's different. It's kind of like the whole thing is trying to release fight or flight responses so that whatever happens to you, it's trapped in your body. And that's kind of like how you move through the world. And so I had met with this doctor. I live in New York City, so I'm very lucky in that there's, you name it, you can find it here, which is probably not the case if you live in some much smaller town. And I met him, and it was fascinating because I didn't like to be touched. That was my thing. I didn't like to be hugged. I didn't like to be touched. And this was based on touch. And basically it's like they tap on your spine, which is where your nervous system is, and it releases whatever's trapped. And honestly, I was like, it seems like smoke and mirrors. I don't know how it works, but it does. And he and I, like, once you start there, you would go multiple times a week, and it's short. It's like 10 or 15 minutes. There's other people there, which that freaked me out too. What was fascinating about it was, he had said to me when he first met me, he was like, your body is just flexed and braced for danger. He's like, that is just how you move through the world. He's like, you are rigid. And he said, I promise whatever is stuck for you will be unstuck by the time we're done. And I was like, okay. And what really the fascinating thing that happened was very controlled, very, very controlled. And I didn't like to feel anything, and I didn't feel anything. And the only emotion I was really comfortable with was anger, because it's very mobilizing. But I would not cry in front of somebody. I would never be vulnerable. That was just not going to happen. And what ended up happening with him is I started to feel emotions. And then it's like, you have to learn to name them. And what are they? And what do they mean? And it's terrifying if you don't feel things and then you start to. It's very scary. So I felt like he probably made the most profound difference for me, because I started to feel emotions.
That had to be scary and something new to get used to.
It was. And he had even said to me, and it was interesting, I felt like I would just lash out at him. And it's like kind of a protective measure, right? Like to keep people away from you a little bit, to create a barrier. And he and I were talking, I was like, I feel like I lash out at you. And he was like, I get it. He's like, it is like an eggshell cracking, and it's frightening. And he was like, never worry about your growth and how it affects me. He's like, you're doing great. So he was really, really good. I worked with him for 1.5 years, and it was great. But I still was no closer to my goal of meeting someone. So it's like, well, what can we try next? And so my therapist had suggested a sex therapist. And I was like, okay, maybe. I mean, maybe that's what the issue is. And I knew it would be hellish. I was like, this is going to be something. But I was desperate. And that was the thing about therapy, where I could say how I could see how much I changed, was that I was always one of those people. I am very pragmatic. And I was like, how does that work? What is that based on? But the longer I was in therapy, the more open I became. And I was also more desperate. So it was like I was willing to try anything, and I know that you talk a lot about adversity. And I think the two most important traits for anybody are being resilient and tenacious. Like just being able to pick yourself back up and keep going no matter how long it takes. Because a lot of things in life take a very long time.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. So you've generously have made your memoir available for free on your website. So what motivated you to make it accessible this way? And what kind of impact are you hoping to, have on those that read it?
So when I started therapy, I was so closed that I didn't talk to anybody about what my experiences were. And at that point, I had not shared my history with anybody, none of my close friends, nobody. And it took me, I was in therapy for 3 years before I started telling my close circle of friends. So when I started therapy, and I am actually a writer, so for me, it was very natural that, it's like, other than my shrink, who was I talking to? Nobody. So I would come home from my sessions and write down what happened as a way to process it. And so I did it for 12 years.
Yeah.
And spoiler, I did finally meet somebody. Like I had, it's like I was willing to move heaven and earth, and I did. And I finally met someone. And it was so funny that all of a sudden I was like, I have been doing this for years and years and years. And I thought I should write a book. Like, who else has really explored as many kinds of therapies as me to meet someone. And I think it's so interesting, even when I was in group therapy, which I was very, very resistant to for years and years and years, because that was the first thing my shrink suggested. And I was like, no. Everybody had a partner but me. And honestly, I think that a lot of times, and not judging any of their relationships, a lot of them were very happy, but I think it's very easy for people to end up in relationships that are what they're comfortable with or used to, which is not necessarily healthy. Yeah. And I never wanted that. So I kind of went the other extreme where I was like, I am not going to end up with somebody, like I am never going to be with somebody where I don't feel like my home is safe or
Right.
where I want to be. And I think unfortunately a lot of people do that.
Yeah, that's so true. So in your journey, you emphasize, the significance of having a tribe. So how did you discover your tribe, and what advice would you give to others who are seeking a supportive community?
When I had decided to write the book, which has been years in the making at this point, you think a lot about, and I know you've written a book, you think a lot about what is the goal of the book? And there are as many goals for books as there are people. And mine really was never about fame or fortune, which is good because I'm not going to get there. But it really was about, I felt like the coincidence or the intersection of eating disorders and sexual abuse, it's so common. And it's just not out there. It's not talked about. It's not discussed. If you research it, there's like nothing out there. It's just like they are separate things. And this is a stunning statistic, and it's horrible. But 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused. And that's 42 million Americans who have experienced sexual abuse, and almost 29 million have an eating disorder. And the overlap is huge. And again, I think people get so focused on, and I think it's for alcohol, drugs, food, name your addiction, it's a distraction. It's covering up the real issue, right? Like you're focusing all your time and attention on whatever your addiction is or whatever your problem is, and not really focusing on the core issue, which is often hidden for people. So in terms of, my tribe, I feel like I actually have a lot of tribes. I feel like anybody who has been sexually abused is part of my tribe. Anybody who suffers from an eating disorder is part of my tribe. I would also say I am a runner. Runners are my tribe. I feel like, you know what I mean? Like it's all the ways in which you kind of connect with people.
So you are on the Fearless Fridays with Maryann podcast. How are you living a fearless life?
I feel like, and I'm trying to think of a way to say it that's not almost profane, but I feel like I had been balls to the walls with this, my book. I mean, and at every stage along the way, because it is so personal, and for someone who didn't like to be touched and hated to be naked, I have made myself as naked as I can be, literally, figuratively. And I feel like I really checked in with myself all along about the book. Like, can I do this? Can I do this? And it was okay if the answer was no, but I was always like, you know what? No, I think I can. And I think one of the things that has come out of the book is that I really feel like I want to be of service, right? I want to show people that there's hope, that you can, no matter what your trauma may be, you are not consigned to a lifetime of shame. And particularly with childhood sexual abuse, I feel like there is nothing more shameful, nothing more taboo. And given how prevalent it is, I am just kind of astonished how, as a society, we shut our eyes to it and pretend it's not there. And it is there. Like, look left, look right. It's there. I think one of the great things that's actually happened as a result of my book being published is I had decided I'm going to have to tell everyone I know, because I wanted to find people who it could help. And as I've been telling everybody I come across and reaching out to people, it's like there's 3 reactions. There's the group that are like, oh, that's horrible, which is, sane reaction. There's a huge group of people that are like, me too, which is heartbreaking. Yeah. And then there's the third group where it's like a wall comes up where they just don't know. And you don't know what anybody's experience is. So you don't know if it's triggering for them. You just don't know the lives that people live. So I try to be like, have a little bit of kindness for these people where I'm like, I don't know that that's the normal reaction. But it's kind of like gotten me to a point where I'm like, how do I break through? How do I get people to see it? And so I have done things that I pitch tough posts. Like I am just out there. I'm like, I have nothing to lose, right? Any publicity is better than no publicity. And again, it's available for free. So I feel like my intentions are pure, but it is like a subject that people just don't like talking about. And again, because I know that you're an author too, I had subscribed to this newsletter, and it was this woman who's like, I read every response I get and I want to know what your biggest issue is. And I wrote to her and I was like, it's the subject matter. It's like, and guess who didn't respond to me?
Right. Yeah. So when you started sharing your story, because I know that you mentioned that you hadn't told anyone about it, And you said that there's 3 typical, responses and things like that. To the ones that were supportive, what was their reaction like? Like, why didn't you say something sooner? How can I help? Things like that.
So my close circle of friends, that was, and I had told them, and this was years ago. And then when I first wrote it, before it was published, and I sent it to like my core circle, because I was like, I've never written a book. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. And it was interesting that one of my closest friends, who I've been friends with for 30 years, felt awful that she never knew. And I was like, but you didn't know because I never told you. So it's like, I think, particularly for and this is something I picked up from the chiropractor, there's internal processors and external processors. And external processors talk about everything, tell everybody how they feel. Like it's all about, right. That's how they make sense of the world. Internal processors keep everything inside. And that was me. So for all those people that keep everything inside, you're only showing a portion of yourself to the world that you want to. And nobody knows the real you, right? Nobody knows the path that you're walking. And I think for my friends, it was really hard to see how much I struggled, but then I never shared with anybody.
Right. So as we get ready to wind down and wrap up, what are you working on? What else are you looking forward to for the rest of the year?
So in terms of the book, I really am just trying to figure out how to get it into the right hands. And so, in addition to me pitching like outrageous publications, I've also started targeting, and I'm having better success, like all the different therapies that I did. I started kind of sending it out to the organizations as a free resource, so that, if you're looking into EMDR and you come across a website, like maybe you'll find it there. So that's kind of what my focus is right now. And, if you have any ideas for me, I would love to hear them.
Awesome. Yeah, well, definitely. It will be in the show notes. And if everyone who listens, there's, 9 different countries last time that I checked that subscribe to the show. So you're going to start getting a lot of downloads. So
that's great. Awesome. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So what last parting words do you want to share with our audience, with our listeners? And can you mention your website one more time?
Sure. So first of all, I guess I'm going to say 2 things. If you have been abused as a child, no matter what, it is not your fault. Even if you don't believe that, try to remember it is not your fault. And that courage begins with the single step, right? So don't look at people like me or you, where we're very kind of open about our experiences. You have to walk before you can run. So just because you're in a place today doesn't mean you're going to be in that same place tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's so true.
All about moving forward and just trying to be a little bit more courageous every day. And if you need help, at least we live in a time now where help is available. There's a lot of resources online. So even if you feel like I can't tell my friends, I can't tell my family, maybe there's somebody online that you can talk to from an organization that can help. And in my book at pattycabot.com, so it's PATTYCABOT.com. At the end of my book, there's resources. So whether it's NIDA, which is about eating disorders, or RAIN, which is about, abuse and incest and sexual assault and all kinds of horrible things that befall people. And I also described the therapies that I used. And one last plug for something that I didn't talk about was I also started meditating. And I don't know how or why, meditation is the most transformational thing I've done. And again, I don't know how or why.
I love that. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your incredible story of resilience and hope with us.
Thank you so much, Maryann. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to leave a 5-star review and share with a friend or 2. If you're not already following us on social media, come join the Fearless community at MRD Empowerment Solutions on Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website, MaryannRiveraDannert.com. I'll catch you next week with a new episode, and remember that you are a priority and you matter.